the night the unit exploded. The alarm blared through the dim corridors of Rikers Island's Supermax block, a sound so loud it felt like the walls themselves were screaming. Inside Block C-95, chaos was already unfolding. Officers shouted commands, but no one could hear over the noise. Inmates were pounding on their doors, metal clanging against metal. Then it happened. A door that should have never opened did. An inmate named Marcus Red Harlan, a man serving 25 years for armed robbery, stood in the open doorway, staring at the stunned officer on duty. In his hand, a sharpened piece of metal glinted under the flickering fluorescent light. The officer froze. Red didn't move either. It was a silent standoff, man versus system, inmate versus officer, the kind of moment that could end careers or lives. But before anyone could react, the sound of more doors sliding open echoed down the hall. Something had gone terribly wrong. Inside Rikers Island Supermax, control was slipping, and nobody knew how it started. Beat. But how did a place built to contain New York's most dangerous inmates lose control from inside? To understand that, we have to go back. The pressure cooker. Rikers Island isn't just a prison. It's a city of walls, towers, and lock gates floating in the East River. For decades, it's been called Hell's Waiting Room. Every sound echoes. Every stare feels like a threat. And inside the Supermax wing, tension lives in the air. The officers call it C-95, the cage. It's where inmates too violent for general population are sent. They're locked down 23 hours a day, released only for showers or solitary exercise in small metal cages. Marcus Red Harlan arrived there after attacking another inmate with a food tray. He had tattoos running up his arms, a scar across his cheek, and eyes that burned with defiance. But he wasn't the only one the staff feared. There was Darnell Ice Carter, a quiet inmate known for organizing fights and controlling contraband like a business. On the officer's side, tensions were high too. Officer Diaz, a 10-year veteran, said every shift felt like walking into a war zone. "You can't relax here," he said. "One mistake, and you're the story on tomorrow's news." Inside C-95, it wasn't just inmates versus officers. It was people versus pressure. Every rule felt like a test. Every order felt like a spark waiting for a flame. And that flame was about to ignite. One morning, when Officer Diaz searched Red's cell, he found something strange under the bunk. Not a weapon, not drugs, but a small map. A hand-drawn layout of the Supermax floor, marked with symbols and lines. When Diaz confronted Red, the inmate just smirked and said, "Sometimes you gotta know the maze to survive in it." That night, rumors spread across the unit. Some said Red was planning an escape. Others said it wasn't about freedom. It was about revenge. Officers doubled patrols. The air felt heavy, like the storm before lightning. And then, during the 11 p.m. count, the power flickered once, twice, before plunging the entire block into darkness. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Then came the scream. The blackout begins. The emergency lights flickered weakly, throwing red glows across the cell block. Every sound, every breath, echoed like thunder in the dark. Officer Diaz gripped his flashlight tight. His radio buzzed with static. "Unit Bravo, report. What's your status?" No reply, only silence. The inmates were awake now, every last one of them. Metal clanged against doors. Voices rose from the shadows. Some shouted for guards. Others laughed. But the laughter wasn't joy, it was anticipation. In cell 14, Marcus Red Harlan stood near the bars, whispering to someone across the hallway. Behind him, faint glimmers of makeshift weapons, toothbrush shanks, sharpened spoons, caught the red emergency light. From the officer's booth, Diaz saw movement on the surveillance screens, blurry shapes darting through hallways that should have been empty. Someone was out of their cell. That was impossible unless someone had the keys. Then a voice crackled over the radio, shaky, terrified. "This is Officer Kelly on Tier 2. They're out. The doors are open down here." The radio cut off mid-scream. Diaz's pulse spiked. He slammed the emergency lock button, but the system didn't respond. Power failure had frozen the entire grid. He could hear boots running in the hallway. And then, From the far end of the block came the metallic crash of a door being kicked open. Inside the chaos, Red and Ice met face to face for the first time. Two inmates with different motives, but one shared enemy, the system that caged them. Red said quietly, "This is it. Either we take back control, or they bury us here." Ice nodded. "Then let's make and remember our names." With a nod to the others, they moved fast, precise, coordinated. These weren't random attacks. They were planned. In the control booth, Diaz could see them coming down the corridor. He reached for his sidearm, his hands trembling. Over the intercom, a robotic voice repeated, "Security breach in Block C-95. Initiating lockdown." But there was no lockdown, only darkness and the sound of footsteps getting closer. When the inmates reached the security door, Red shouted, "We're not animals. We're fighting back." He slammed a fire extinguisher into the glass. The first officer who rushed forward tried to push him back, but was tackled by two inmates from behind. Screams echoed through the hall. Pepper spray filled the air. An entire block became a war zone. Inmates and officers locked in a deadly dance of survival. For the first time in years, the walls of Rikers Supermax felt powerless. By 2:14 a.m., the riot had spread to the lower tier. Officers barricaded themselves in the observation room, watching the security feed until, click, the cameras went dark. Then, from the black void of the monitor, one single image flickered back on. A grainy shot of cell 14, Red cell. Empty. Beat. The power blackout was an accident. Someone had planned this, and the deeper investigators would dig, the darker the truth inside Rikers Island would become. The war for C-95. The hallway was a blur of shadows and panic. By the time backup reached the first tier, C-95 had already turned into a battlefield. Flashlights swung wildly through the smoke-filled corridors. Officers yelled orders no one could hear. And in the middle of it all, the inmates moved like a tide, breaking through barriers that held them for years. Officer Diaz ducked behind an overturned desk, coughing as pepper spray and smoke mixed in the air. Somewhere down the hall, someone was shouting for help, an officer trapped in a utility cage. The radio screamed with overlapping voices. "We need control units on Tier 1 now." "They've got the lower door." Repeat, inmates have the lower door. Through the chaos, Marcus read. Harlan stood at the front line, shirt torn, blood streaked across his arm. He wasn't smiling now. This wasn't the rebellion he wanted. It was survival. Behind him, Ice barked orders to the other inmates. "Block the stairs. Don't let him come up." They grabbed mop handles, chair legs, anything that could become a weapon. The clang of metal echoed like war drums. On the officer's side, Diaz and Sergeant Coleman tried to regroup. Coleman was old school, 30 years inside Rikers. "Listen to me, kid," he said through gritted teeth. "We don't lose this block. Not tonight." He loaded a canister launcher and fired down the hallway. A flash of light burst through the smoke, scattering inmates back into their cells. For a moment, just a moment, silence returned. Then came the sound no officer ever wants to hear, the main gate opening. Red froze. He turned his head slowly toward the far end of the block. Someone, maybe a guard, maybe an inmate, had triggered the main gate controls. And from the other side, more prisoners poured in. Now the entire Supermax wing was awake. The control room standoff. Inside the control booth, two officers barricaded themselves with chairs and file cabinets. They watched the monitors as the chaos spread across the tiers. Suddenly, a face appeared on the screen. Red's. He was standing right in front of the camera, staring directly into it. "Tell your bosses," he said, voice calm but firm. "We want the power back on. We want med checks. And we want Diaz out here, face to face." Then the feed cut to static. Diaz felt his stomach drop. They knew his name. He wasn't just another uniform anymore. He was a target. Retaliation, order. By 3 a.m., the emergency response team, armored, shielded, and armed with non-lethal rounds, had arrived at the perimeter gate. They were ordered to retake C-95 by any means necessary. Outside, reporters were already gathering. Word had leaked. Rikers Island Supermax on full lockdown. Multiple officers injured. Inside, Diaz could hear the heavy boots of the riot squad approaching. But before they could breach, something unexpected happened. The sound of a loudspeaker crackling to life. Red's voice filled the block. "You think you can keep breaking us, huh? Look around. Your cage just broke itself." Some inmates cheered. Others banged on doors. And just like that, the riot reignited. The officers moved in formation, shields up, lights cutting through the smoke. Plastic rounds cracked the air like fireworks. Inmates dropped to the floor, covering their heads. Screams echoed, metal bent, boots stomped. Then Diaz saw him, Red, standing in the open, refusing to run. For a second, the two locked eyes again. It wasn't hate Diaz saw. It was exhaustion. Years of anger, pain, and pressure exploding in one night. Red shouted, "You think we're animals? You made us this way." Before Diaz could respond, a flashbang detonated between them. White light, ringing ears, silence. When Diaz's vision cleared, Red was gone. Only smoke remained. Aftermath of the first breach. By dawn, the riot had finally been contained. Dozens injured, for officers hospitalized, and 27 inmates transferred to isolation units. But something didn't add up. The power grid that failed? It wasn't caused by age or storm. It was manually shut down from inside the control center. As investigators combed through the wreckage, they found a message scratched into the wall near cell 14. "This is just the beginning." Officer Diaz stared at it quietly. He knew Red wasn't just fighting for chaos. He was trying to expose something deeper, something rotten inside Rikers Island itself. And if the rumor was true, Red wasn't done yet. The hidden hand inside Rikers. When the sun finally rose over Rikers Island, the smoke was still rising from C-95. Helicopters circled above. Reporters shouted questions from the outer gates. But inside those concrete walls, the real story was buried under silence and fear. Officer Diaz sat in the debriefing room, hands still shaking. His uniform was torn, his face bruised. Across from him sat Internal Affairs Investigator Lieutenant Morrison, scribbling notes on a yellow pad. "Walk me through it again," Morrison said. Diaz's voice was hoarse. The power, it didn't fail. It was killed from inside. Someone knew the system codes. Morrison leaned forward. "You think an inmate did it?" Diaz hesitated. "No, they don't have access to the control relays." He paused. This was someone with clearance. That word hung in the air like smoke. The key that shouldn't exist. When technicians checked the logs, they found something strange. The electrical override had been triggered from maintenance room 3A. Only staff could enter there. But the sign-in sheet showed no one had clocked in that night. Even stranger, one of the backup key cards was missing. Not stolen from an inmate locker, but from the officer's arsenal cabinet. Someone inside the system had opened the door for Red and his crew. The Unseen Alliance. Down in solitary, Marcus Red, Harlan sat on a thin mattress, staring at the flickering light above his head. He wasn't angry. He was waiting. A guard slid his food tray under the door, then paused. "Word is, they're blaming you for everything," the guard said quietly. Red didn't look up. "They would." The guard leaned closer. "They don't know it wasn't your plan, do they?" Red's eyes flicked up sharply. The guard smirked. "Some of us know the truth." Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving behind a folded note taped to the bottom of the tray. When Red opened it, it read, "You did your part. Now we do ours." He clenched the note tight, realizing he wasn't just part of a rebellion. He was a pawn in something far bigger. Inside the investigation room, Lieutenant Morrison called an emergency staff meeting. Dozens of correctional officers crowded into the conference room, exhausted, bruised, and angry. "We're dealing with an inside leak," Morrison announced. This wasn't an inmate uprising. It was an operation, planned, timed, and executed with help. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "You saying one of us helped them?" Morrison slammed his folder shut. "I'm saying someone on this island wanted that riot to happen." He turned to Diaz. You were on duty in the control booth. Did you see anyone unusual? Diaz shook his head. No one entered. But I saw a shadow on the camera near the relay hallway, just before the lights went out. Could you recognize them? No, Diaz said. But whoever was, they knew exactly where to go. The ghost officer. That night, Morrison's team pulled every surveillance feed from the control hallway. Most were too damaged from the blackout to be clear. But on one tape, just before the lights failed, a faint figure appeared. An officer in uniform, badge visible, face obscured by shadow. They zoomed in and froze the frame. The name tag read, M. Keller. Officer Keller. Transferred 3 months earlier after an assault complaint. But according to payroll records, he was still being paid. How's that possible? Morrison muttered. Diaz looked at the screen and said quietly, because Keller never left. The cover-up? Before Morrison could report to command, her access credentials were suddenly revoked. Every file about Officer Keller, gone from the database. Her computer screen flashed. Access denied. Admin lock. When she tried to contact the warden, his assistant simply said, "Ma'am, you're advised to stop digging. This goes above your clearance." That's when she realized the riot wasn't an accident or a rebellion. It was a message. Someone inside Rikers was orchestrating chaos to cover their tracks. Corruption, brutality, maybe even murder. And the inmates? They were just the smokescreen. Message from the inside. At midnight, Officer Diaz got a call on his personal phone. No caller ID. Just static, and then a voice he recognized. "Diaz, they'll come for you next. Keller's not gone. Watch your back." Then the line went dead. He froze. The voice belonged to Red. But Red was still in solitary confinement. Diaz checked the call log. No number listed. He looked toward the dark river outside Rikers Island and whispered, "What's really going on in here?" The deep corruption inside Rikers Island. The morning after the riot, Rikers Island looked calm from the outside. But inside, the place felt haunted. Officers walked the halls with their hands on their belts, jumpy at every sound. Inmates whispered in their cells, trading stories about who started it, who got hurt, and who really pulled the strings. But in a small office at the end of the administrative corridor, Lieutenant Morrison was piecing together a story the public was never meant to hear. She had seen the doctored security tapes. She had read the deleted transfer logs. And she had just found something even more disturbing. A list of unauthorized payments routed through a correctional contractor called Brookfield Security Solutions. The company wasn't supposed to exist. And one of the listed payees? Officer M. Keller. The hidden network. Inside solitary, Red sat on his bunk, staring at the concrete wall. He'd been there for 72 hours straight. No light, no sound, no visits. But when the slot in his door opened, he noticed something odd. The officer on duty didn't speak or make eye contact, just slid a small folded paper through the slot. Red opened it. It was a list of names. Some were inmates. Others were guards. At the top, one name was circled in red ink. Captain J. Frazier, the head of Rikers Island's internal control unit. Beneath it, a single line written in small letters. Frazier runs the deals. Keller enforces them. Don't talk. Just survive. Red read it over and over. His pulse quickened. He realized this wasn't just about brutality or bad management. It was about money, contraband trades, illegal transfers, private contracts. Everything flowing through Rikers, from drugs to information, was being taxed and filtered through a secret ring, one that connected officers and inmates alike. And the riot? That was just a cleanup job, a distraction to erase evidence. Officer Diaz's doubt. Meanwhile, Officer Diaz sat in his car outside the Rikers parking lot, engine idling. He couldn't shake what he'd heard from Red's voice on the phone the night before. He replayed it in his mind, that warning. Keller's not gone. Watch your back. He wanted to believe it was a trick, a manipulation. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. So Diaz went back inside, not for duty, but for answers. He stopped by the control room, checked the access records. There was another log entry from Maintenance 3A, timestamped 2 hours before the riot. Key card used, J. Frazier. Diaz's heart sank. The same captain who briefed the staff that morning was the one who opened the door. The meeting in the hall. Morrison found Diaz outside the staff lounge. He looked pale, drained. She handed him a folder. I think we're looking at the same ghost. Inside were photos, grainy, low quality, but damning. Keller in uniform, walking beside Captain Frazier, inside a restricted area weeks after Keller's supposed transfer. Morrison whispered, "They're running something here, Diaz. Something off the books. Weapons, drugs, cash, maybe even inmate transfers for payoffs. Rikers isn't a prison anymore. It's a business." Diaz clenched his jaw. "And we're the cover-up crew." Morrison nodded. "Exactly." Red's proposition. Later that night, Morrison arranged an unauthorized interview with Red in solitary. She needed his testimony, and maybe his trust. When she entered, Red sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the wall. "I heard you were the one asking questions," he said. "I'm not here to make friends," Morrison replied. "I just want to know how you knew about the power grid." Red smirked. "You really think we did that alone?" He leaned forward. "Listen, lady, you've got dirty cops selling access codes. You got contractors making deals in the dark. We didn't start this. We reacted to it." Morrison frowned. "Who helped you?" Red smiled faintly. "Let's just say someone who wears the same badge as you." He slid something across the table, a small chip wrapped in foil. This was pulled from the control panel, NC 95 after the blackout. Plug it in and you'll see everything. Morrison took it carefully, knowing what it meant. If this chip contained data from the system logs, and if it showed internal tampering, the truth could destroy Rikers from the top down. The trap? When Morrison left the interview room, she noticed 2 guards standing by her car in the parking lot. Not from her unit, not wearing standard badges. One of them was Officer Keller. He smiled. "Late night, Lieutenant?" Morrison's hand went to her bag, feeling the chip inside. "Just work," she said calmly. Keller nodded. "You know, it's funny. Every time someone starts digging too deep around here, something happens." He leaned in closer. "Drive safe." She didn't answer. She just got in her car and drove away, knowing she was being followed. The warning. That same night, Officer Diaz's locker was broken into. His ID was gone, his uniform slashed, and taped to the inside of his locker door was a piece of paper that read, "Silence keeps you alive." He stared at it for a long time before taking it down. The message wasn't from inmates this time. It was from his own department. Rikers Island wasn't just falling apart. It was eating itself from the inside. And both Red and Diaz knew. The next move they make could expose everything or get them both killed. The leak. By dawn, Rikers Island was under what they called administrative lockdown. No visitors, no press, no questions to the public. It looked like just another day inside one of America's toughest jails. But behind the razor wire, the real war had already begun, one that wasn't between inmates and officers, but between truth and silence. Morrison's decision. Lieutenant Morrison hadn't slept in 36 hours. She sat alone in her apartment, blinds shut. The data chip Red had given her glowing faintly inside a flash drive. When she opened the files, her breath caught. Video logs, system overrides, payment transfers to dummy accounts, and a hidden audio clip, one recorded during the blackout itself. A man's voice. "Shut it down. Make it look like inmate sabotage. We'll clean it up after." The voice was unmistakable. Captain J. Frazier. Morrison closed the laptop, heart pounding. She knew this wasn't just evidence. It was a death sentence if anyone found out she had it. But she couldn't stay silent anymore. So she made a call, not to the warden, not to internal affairs, but to a reporter she trusted. She whispered only 3 words. "It's Rikers Island." Then she hit send. The setup. Meanwhile, inside the Supermax wing, Red could feel the shift. Cells were quieter than usual. Officers whispered to each other instead of shouting orders. Something was coming. and he could sense it. He watched from the small window in his cell as Officer Diaz walked by. For a moment, their eyes met again, the same unspoken understanding that had grown between them since that night. Diaz stopped. "You know something's about to happen, don't you?" Red nodded. "You're not going to like how it ends." Diaz leaned closer. "Who's helping you?" Red smiled faintly. "Someone who's finally had enough." Diaz frowned. "Morrison?" But Red said nothing. Just tapped the glass once, boom, like a silent warning. The broadcast. At exactly 3:17 p.m., every screen inside the administrative block flickered. Then, one by one, the feeds changed from security footage to a live broadcast from a local news station. Breaking news. Exclusive footage from inside Rikers Island reveals corruption, sabotage, and the deliberate orchestration of a violent riot. Every officer stopped. Every inmate listened. Even the warden froze. On screen, leaked clips showed Officer Keller walking through restricted corridors the night of the blackout, Captain Frazier issuing the order to kill the power, and internal memos showing off-the-books transfers of taxpayer funds. In minutes, the world knew Rikers Island, the so-called fortress of control, was corrupt to its core. Morrison's voice played over the footage. "You can cage people. You can silence them. But you can't hide the truth forever." The retaliation, the fallout was immediate. The FBI moved in. Warrants were issued. Captain Frazier was placed on suspension pending federal investigation. Keller? Gone. Vanished before sunrise. Inside C-95, the cells were locked tight again. But for the first time, Red wasn't seen as the instigator. He was the whistleblower. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He just sat quietly, staring at the wall, knowing the storm was far from over. The final exchange. 3 weeks later, Officer Diaz visited Red under strict supervision. He sat across from him in the visitation room. Two men who had lived opposite sides of the same war. Diaz said softly, "They're talking about shutting Rikers down." Red looked up. "They'll just build another one." Diaz sighed. "Maybe, but maybe this time someone will listen." Red leaned forward. "Don't fool yourself, officer. Systems don't change, people do." They stared at each other in silence. No hatred, no anger, just a strange, weary respect. As Diaz stood to leave, Red said, "Tell Morrison she did the right thing." Diaz nodded. "She knows." The island that couldn't be silenced. A month later, Rikers Island made national headlines again. Not for a riot, not for an escape, but for something New York had never seen before, a federal order to begin dismantling the prison. Public officials promised reform. Journalists called it a victory for justice. But those who lived behind the walls knew better. Because Rikers wasn't just a place. It was a mirror, a reflection of everything broken about a system built on punishment instead of rehabilitation, silence instead of truth. Marcus read, Harlan was transferred to another facility, labeled high risk. Officer Diaz filed for early retirement. Lieutenant Morrison was reassigned, quietly, to a federal oversight position in D.C. And yet, the story didn't die. Clips from the leaked footage went viral online. Viewers across the U.S., the U.K., and Canada debated one thing. If Rikers could hide that much corruption for decades, what else are we not being told? As the camera pans across the decaying towers of Rikers Island, a voice echoes, Morrison's voice. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from the courtroom. It comes from the courage to speak when no one else will. The screen fades to black. The sound of distant sirens fades into the hum of the city. And for the first time, Rikers Island is quiet.